Welcome back, everybody, to the show, to the Renaissance Human podcast. In today's episode, I will be discussing the declining support for Israel from the United States of America. America is going through a drastic change in its demographics, which means that ethnic groups and cultural groups that make up the population of the United States are now based on racial lines. We're not based purely on racial lines, but on cultural lines as well, but which is purely cultural. When it comes to race relations, which is purely a human made concept, there's no jurisdiction in reality. When I discuss different cultures, I'm not talking about a person's skin color, merely culture and political traditions which they come from. For example, in Syria, the reigning regime in Syria, which is run by Bashar al Assad, is Al Wali. And in the Muslim world, the Alwas are not seen as proper Muslims, that's from their point of view, and they only make up 12% of the actual population within Syria. But during the colonial period, it was the French that put the Alwalis actually into power, and that's why there's ethnic tensions, religious tensions, which we in Europe don't truly understand. And because of that, when different ethnic groups, different culture groups come to Western cultures, they can bring their disagreements and wars and conflicts into the United States, into different nations, just because they're bringing with them their cultural legacy. At the moment, according to the author Tim Marshall, the Middle East is going through what York went through from the 1618 to 1648. That's called the 30 Years' War. It was a religious conflict, ethnic conflict within Central Europe, particularly in the Germanies in the 17th century. And that's when Europe went from fighting wars purely based on religion between Protestants and Catholics to more state orientated wars, just because they realised that we couldn't keep doing this. We can't keep killing our fellow man over religion. And that's what the Middle East, according to Tim Marshall, is going through at the moment since 2010. They're going through their own version of the 30 Years' War, where either at the end of this conflict, nation states will be created, and hopefully the actual Muslims will stop killing each other over the religious differences. But Tim Marshall also said, which I agree, that us who live in the West, we don't truly understand them because in the West, particularly in the Anglo-Sphere, we're now mostly not religious. We don't practice our religion seriously. We're not really Catholics, not really Protestants. We're just use that label. We're not actually properly religious, unlike people living in the Middle East. And also, we're not tribal as well. So, we don't really understand how that tribal dynamics works. So it's not something that's within our Western worldview. And that's something to be aware of as well. So, when I'm talking about different immigration, I'm not talking about a person's skin color. I'm talking about their culture on which they import from different nations as well. Like, for example, if I went to the United States, I'm British, I'm English, I'll be importing my own cultural legacy as well, like the English Commonwealth, which American use as well. Different forms of liberalism, because France is a liberal society, Australia is a liberal society, North America liberal society, that's America and Canada, and that's got liberalism from the English tradition as well. They're all different forms of liberalism and different attitudes to governing. That's why if you see President Macron, who's in Paris, President of France, if you listen to him speak, he speaks with such passion, with such enthusiasm, because he actually believes what we're saying as well. Unlike liberals in the United States or the United Kingdom or Australia, just because he's from a very different tradition of liberalism to the viewer who's most likely reading this, was most likely from the United States or from the United Kingdom or the English speaking worlds. So that's something to be aware of. For the United States, its population now is becoming more Latino, more groups from Latin America, and because of that, by 2045, the ethnic group, the white majority, will then become a minority of around 58% by 2045, though some data suggests this could actually accelerate. And because of this, these people will be from Latin American backgrounds. They won't care about Israel. They'll care about Latin America, South America, and because we live in democratic societies, because of this change in America's actual ethnic groups and demographics, they'll still be American. They just won't be interested in Europe. And also, the Jewish population in America itself, it's only around 2.4%. That's now 7.6 million altogether, and that's incredibly small. and because of that group, will get smaller as well due to more immigration, and also Latin Americans who's lived in America now for 2 or 3 generations. They are Americanized, but they don't care about Europe. They care about North America. They care about South America, and that's why over a long period, the United States just won't care about Europe, won't care about Israel. Particularly now that the United States is energy sufficient since the Shell Revolution in the past 20 years, it doesn't need oil from the Middle East. And America wants to get out of the Middle East. It doesn't get involved in any conflicts there. So, in the long period, if these demographics keep changing, and also if American foreign policy doesn't need the Middle East, then that'll just become the new historical norm. Because again, America is a democratic society. It votes its leaders into office based upon the support of the electorate. So if the voters don't care, then Congress won't care. We're seeing something similar now happening in the United Kingdom with the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, potentially losing 30 Labour seats due to the 30 Labour seats that they've got predominantly Muslim constituencies, or the Muslim vote could actually tip the balance for them to vote Conservative or possibly independent candidate, which could cost them, Labour, 30 seats. This is because Labour, by supporting Israel, is using support of its Muslim Arab population, particularly in the cities. That's how the actual voters in democracies affect the foreign policy. For example, if this was a predominantly Muslim Arab orientated, a good 400 seats, and not 400 seats, but 100 seats, then you're probably going to see Conservative and Labour politicians changing their actual foreign policy on this issue, just because then again, political leaders or living democracies don't want to get elected, and the only way to get elected is through democratic votes. Now, there's a generational divide in the United States as well. The silent generation, born between 1928 and 1945, they actually fought in World War II, and also the baby boomers born from 1946 to 1964. They also grew up in the aftermath of World War II, and the greatest generation, born between 1901 and 1924, they actually fought during World War II because the greatest generation, silent generation, and the baby boomers, they grew up in the aftermath of World War II, during World War II, and before World War II, even fighting the Great War. And because of this factor, these generations are far more pro internationalization, the pro globalization, the pro bringing the actual world together. The British former Prime Minister John Major, in a recent interview with Yoris Stewart on the Rested Politics podcast, he put forward the argument that in 1992, that a lot of the old generation actually fought during World War II, they were dying, they were retiring, and because of that, the Conservative Party flipped due to the change demographics, change generation, because the World War II generation, they were dying off, and that the Conservative Party became more anti-Europe, anti-globalization, and anti-universalism, which was created to try and bring the nations of Europe together and becoming more anti-Europe, anti the European Union. But something's got to be aware of since the 1050s up until the end of World War II, threat of invasion and foreign wars has hung over the British Isles. But that's a very long time. But now we've got a generation now. It's 2 generations, getting close to 3 generations since the end of World War II. For people living in the Western world, living in Europe, living in England, uh, living in the United States, all they've known for nearly 3 generations is peace. And because they've known peace for this long, they're no longer as accepting of globalization, no longer as accepting as the actual post-war settlement and the actual international architecture what actually secured the peace. Because what secured the peace was the United States. The United States at the World War II, it was one of the only world superpowers apart from the Soviet Union. Though it's debated because the Soviet Union was more of a regional power. They were contained primarily to the Eurasian continent. For the United States, it's both an Atlantic and a Pacific power. And also because the United States, in its history from 1776 until the present day, it only faced 3 major threats. The first was the British Empire. Next was Mexico, but the Mexicans were defeated in the 1846-1848 Mexican-American War. And then the British, they became neutered after two world wars, and the land lease agreement was signed during World War II, where the British surrendered a lot of its bases, most of its bases, for 40 destroyers that were obsolete from the United States, and had to give up its bases in the North American continent. And because of this, the British became neutered. They were exhausted from fighting two world wars. And according to the geopolitical analysis, and Arthur Peter Zahn even predicts that there's a possibility within this century that the United Kingdom might cease as an independent country and be absorbed inside the greater United States, one of the being the 51st state or 52nd state of the United States. That's a possibility. The author and writer and analysis actually put forward as well. And the next big threat to the United States was the Soviet Union. That was the only nation, this is Russia, that actually threatened the United States with total annihilation. Because with America only having really three major enemies, one was defeated, that's the Mexicans, and they're no longer an issue. The British, they've been neutered, they're impotent, they can't really do anything. And you've got the Russians now, who hopefully, from the Americans' point of view, will hopefully die in the Ukraine war. So it's in the Americans' interest to keep that conflict going as well. So hopefully, from what I've been speaking now, you can understand why generations are so important, because each generation you get exposed to new technologies, get exposed to new philosophies as well, because it's in the first 10 years of your working life where you actually form your political views, and those views will be with you for the rest of your life as well. That's why it's just so important, these generational differences, to be aware of them. And also that for the United States as well, since 1992, has been voting into office president after president that's increased isolationist, not interested in foreign policies, not interested in the rest of the world, just part interested in the North American continent. And that's been the historical norm as well. That's why America, they're not being proactive with these international conflicts. They're being reactive. They're constantly reacting as well. And also why 48% of Generation Z and millennials believe that public publicizing vocals don't actually support Israel as well, compared to Generation Z and Xers that support actually Israel as well, and the baby boomers, which is around 83% supporting Israel. So you can see this generational divide happening in the United States. Once the silent generation is dead, once the greatest generation is dead, and once the boomer is dead, support for Israel might flip as well, or just that the Americans just won't be interested. Hope you find this episode useful and informative. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to subscribe, and peace out.